We begin tonight with a major development out of Washington, one that is already igniting intense national and international debate. Earlier today, the president delivered a speech framing what he described as an urgent and necessary overhaul of America's immigration policies. In a stark and sweeping announcement, the president declared a permanent pause on migration from what he referred to as third world countries, arguing that the nation's current immigration framework is failing to protect American safety, economic stability, and national security. According to the administration, this move follows months of internal review, growing political pressure, and ongoing concerns about border security. The president stated that the United States must, in his words, restore control over who comes into our country and ensure that immigration serves the interest of American citizens above all else. The speech outlined several controversial policy shifts. First, the administration intends to halt visas, refugee entries, and discretionary admissions from a long list of developing nations. Second, the president vowed to end federal benefits for non-citizens who are not, quote, contributing positively to the American economy. And third, the administration will initiate a full review of all immigration admissions approved under the previous leadership, a move critics say could amount to a mass reassessment of legal residency statuses across the country. As expected, this announcement has triggered immediate reactions on Capitol Hill. Supporters of the policy are praising what they consider a strong, decisive stance aimed at tightening border controls and prioritizing national security. They argue that years of what they call ineffective or overly lenient immigration enforcement have created vulnerabilities that must be urgently addressed. But opponents, including civil rights groups, immigration advocates, and several lawmakers, are condemning the announcement as discriminatory, inflammatory, and potentially unconstitutional. Many argue that the term third world countries is antiquated and offensive, and that implementing a blanket ban based on national origin could spark severe international fallout, strain diplomatic relations, and endanger vulnerable populations seeking refuge. Meanwhile, legal experts warn that portions of the policy may face immediate court challenges, particularly the proposal to re-evaluate existing immigration approvals. They argue that revoking or reassessing lawful admissions without individual cause could violate due process protections in federal immigration statutes. The international community is also responding tonight. Several foreign governments have already issued statements expressing concern, calling the move an unprecedented reversal of America's historical role as a destination for migrants, asylum seekers, and families fleeing conflict or poverty. Humanitarian organizations say the announcement could exacerbate global instability and place additional pressure on neighboring countries. Back at home, the political implications are profound. With an election season nearing, this policy shift is expected to become a defining issue, energizing supporters who have long demanded stricter immigration enforcement while motivating opponents who see the move as a fundamental departure from American values and legal norms. Thus, what comes next will depend on how quickly the administration moves to implement these changes, how Congress responds, and whether the courts intervene. For now, the president's announcement marks one of the most dramatic immigration directives in decades, setting the stage for a fierce national debate over identity, security, legality, and the future of U.S. immigration policy. Trump's announcement of a permanent pause on migration from what he labeled a third world countries marked one of the most sweeping immigration proposals ever introduced by a U.S. president. He framed the move as a national security measure, arguing that the existing system failed to adequately screen individuals entering the country. According to the statement, the administration believes that a full shutdown is necessary to reassess vulnerabilities, rebuild vetting mechanisms, and reestablish control over entry pathways. The declaration was delivered during a period of heightened public concern following a violent incident in Washington, D.C., which Trump used as evidence of systemic failure. His message emphasized urgency and portrayed the policy as a protective shield for American citizens. Supporters of the proposal viewed it as a decisive response to long-standing frustrations around border control and enforcement, while critics warned that such a broad freeze could disrupt communities, families, and industries reliant on immigrant labor. The language of the announcement sparked widespread debate because Trump did not specify which countries the policy would formally include or exclude. Analysts noted that the term "a third world countries" is outdated, politically charged, and not used in modern diplomatic or legal frameworks, raising concerns about how such a policy would be implemented. Questions also emerged regarding its constitutionality, its impact on diplomatic relations, and the legal challenges that could arise if the government attempted to halt all immigration from dozens of nations at once. The urgency behind Trump's announcement was heavily linked to a recent attack near the White House that left 2 National Guard members dead. The suspect, an Afghan national who had entered the United States under a previous immigration program, became the centerpiece of Trump's argument that America's vetting systems had failed. By highlighting this incident, the administration framed the attack not as an isolated tragedy, but as the result of policy weakness inherited from the prior administration. This single event was used to illustrate broader concerns about national security vulnerabilities. Trump argued that previous immigration programs had been too lenient and that the lack of rigorous background checks enabled dangerous individuals to enter the country. The administration's messaging emphasized the idea that the federal government must act immediately to prevent similar acts of violence, positioning the new policy as a necessary intervention rather than a political maneuver. However, critics quickly warned that using one incident to justify sweeping immigration changes could create policies driven more by emotion than by evidence. Security experts noted that major reforms typically require comprehensive data, not isolated cases. Civil rights organizations also cautioned that tying national tragedies to specific immigrant groups can fuel discrimination and fear, especially when investigations are still ongoing or incomplete. So despite these concerns, the narrative surrounding the attack became a powerful tool for rallying support for stricter immigration controls. Trump's proposal to end federal benefits and subsidies for many non-citizens signaled a major shift in how the government intends to treat immigrants residing in the United States. The announcement framed these benefits as burdens on taxpayers and argued that restricting them would reduce incentives for people to enter the country unlawfully or remain without proper documentation. Supporters of the policy claimed that limiting access to federal aid would help prioritize citizens and legal residents in social programs that are already under financial strain. The plan quickly drew attention because federal benefits include a wide range of programs such as housing support, health care subsidies, and certain welfare assistance that millions of families rely on. While many immigrants are already barred from numerous federal programs, the administration suggested expanding those restrictions significantly. The announcement did not outline which benefits would be targeted, leaving agencies and policy analysts uncertain about the scale of the cuts. This lack of specificity raised concerns among state and local governments that could face increased pressure if federal support were withdrawn. Humanitarian groups and civil rights organizations responded with strong criticism, arguing that restricting basic support systems could push vulnerable families into deeper hardship. They warned that cutting off services like health care and housing would not only affect immigrants, but also harm American communities by increasing homelessness, public health risks, and economic instability. Critics also highlighted that many immigrants pay taxes and contribute to local economies, questioning the fairness of denying benefits to individuals who financially support the very systems from which they would be excluded. Trump's pledge to terminate the millions of admissions approved under the previous administration introduced one of the most ambitious and controversial immigration reversals in recent history. Now, he claimed that the prior system had admitted large numbers of people without adequate screening, suggesting that many of those approvals were rushed or poorly vetted by portraying past admissions as a threat to national safety and economic stability. The announcement framed mass reversals as a corrective action meant to restore order and strengthen the immigration process. The scope of this proposal immediately raised logistical and legal questions. Reversing admissions on such a large scale would require evaluating visas, humanitarian entries, work authorizations, and possibly even green card status. Immigration experts noted that such a review would demand enormous administrative resources and could lead to significant delays in processing for families, students, and workers who rely on timely documentation. In addition, abrupt changes could disrupt industries dependent on immigrant labor, affecting sectors like healthcare, agriculture, and technology. Opponents argued that the policy risked destabilizing communities by forcing long-term residents into uncertainty or potential deportation. Families who had built their lives in the United States could suddenly face legal limbo, and businesses might lose employees with little warning. Critics also warned that broad reversals without individualized review could violate due process protections. Just despite these concerns, the administration presented the measure as vital to national security, setting the stage for intense political and legal battles over how far the government can go in undoing past immigration decisions. The administration's decision to order a full review of green cards and halt many asylum and immigration requests marked a dramatic tightening of America's entry system. By suspending the processing of applications from certain countries, the government signaled that it intended to reassess the credibility, background checks, and eligibility of thousands of individuals already in the pipeline. This move created immediate uncertainty for families awaiting reunification, students preparing to study in the United States, and workers whose employment depended on timely approval of their documents. The review of green cards suggested a deeper effort to scrutinize applicants who had already passed multiple vetting stages. Legal analysts warned that reevaluating these approvals could lead to longer processing times and potentially reopen cases that had already been finalized. As a result, experts questioned whether the policy could survive legal challenges, since courts often strike down actions that lack clarity or rely on subjective descriptions. Critics warned that the vagueness might also open the door to selective enforcement or political targeting, especially if specific nations were singled out without transparent reasoning. This ambiguity also raised diplomatic concerns. Foreign governments were left to interpret the announcement without knowing whether their citizens would be barred or subject to stricter reviews, potentially straining relationships with key allies and economic partners. Countries that rely on strong immigration ties with the United States expressed unease about how the lack of clarity might disrupt travel, business exchanges, and family reunification. The unclear language of the policy quickly became a central point of debate, with experts and international observers calling for definitions, criteria, and legal grounding before any such sweeping measure could be implemented. The international reaction to Trump's proposed immigration pause has been swift and critical. United Nations agencies and human rights organizations have urged the United States to uphold its commitments to protect refugees and asylum seekers. They warned that a blanket suspension could violate international law and undermine the global system of humanitarian protection that the U.S. has long championed. Diplomats emphasized that the policy could create ripple effects, forcing vulnerable populations to seek refuge in neighboring countries ill-equipped to handle sudden surges. Global media outlets highlighted concerns that the plan could damage America's reputation as a safe haven for immigrants and refugees. Journalists pointed out that such a sweeping approach could be perceived as discriminatory